January in Montana doesn't just feel cold. It feels like the entire landscape is holding its breath. The days are short, the nights are endless, and the darkness is so deep it swallows the glow from a flashlight in seconds. On the evening of January 17th, 2025, the temperature near Lake Elmo in Yellowstone County had dropped to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, with a sharp northwest wind driving streaks of snow across the frozen surface like white smoke on glass. The lake lay silent under a thin layer of cloud-filtered moonlight, and for 3 locals, it was supposed to be an ordinary night of ice fishing. John Mason, 54, owns a small auto repair shop in Billings. His longtime friend Thomas Hale, 61, is a retired Army engineer. Along with them was John's nephew, Kevin Lee, 29, who had recently moved back from Arizona after working in it. They set up on the northwest edge of the lake just after sunset. By 10:30 p.m., they had their lines in, a portable ice tent pitched, and a propane heater humming softly inside. The wind whistled outside, and the sound of cracking ice beneath them was just background noise, nothing unusual for January fishing. But at 10:47 p.m., something happened that would later be recorded in military logs as incident #MT-170,125 UAP. John was the first to notice it, a bright object in the sky, moving low and slow over the eastern tree line. At first, I thought it was a meteor. He later told me in an interview, his voice still unsteady. But meteors don't drift like that, and they don't glow that color. Kevin described it as a cold, bluish-white light, not sharp like a searchlight, but with a strange, milky halo around it. It wasn't flashing, he said. It was breathing, getting brighter, then softer, like it had a heartbeat. Thomas, with years of military service under his belt, was more blunt. That was no plane, no chopper, no drone. It was coming down, but it looked like it was choosing where to land. The object passed over the frozen lake, trailing what Kevin swears looked like a thin mist, impossible in the dry sub-zero air. Then, without warning, it dropped lower and vanished behind a ridge of cracked ice about 1,200 feet away. 2 seconds later, the ground, the ice itself, shuddered, not like an explosion in the air, but a deep muffled thud, the kind you feel in your bones. The 3 men froze, listening. No roar, no debris, no flame. Just that one heavy impact, followed by a silence so complete it made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. "I've lived here my whole life," John told me. "There's always noise. Wind, cars from a highway, dogs barking in the distance. But for those few seconds, there was nothing. It was like the whole world shut off." Then they saw it. Out on the ice where the object had gone down, a faint light began to glow. It wasn't spilling across the surface, it was coming from underneath. A dim, steady luminescence, as if a lantern was burning deep below the frozen water. Thomas wanted nothing to do with it. "We should head back," he told the others. "If it's military, we're already on someone's radar. If it's not, we definitely don't want to be here." But Kevin, younger and more reckless, argued they should take a closer look before anyone else arrived. And so they started across the ice. As they approached, 300 feet, then 200, they saw the glow was coming from a jagged crack in the ice, no more than 6 feet across. From it rose a faint mist, curling upward into the black sky. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp in their nostrils, like ozone after a lightning strike. Here, the men's accounts start to differ. John swears he heard a low-frequency hum, so deep it made his teeth ache. It wasn't coming from the crack, he said. It was coming from everywhere, like the ice itself was vibrating. Kevin says he never heard it, but he saw movement. There was a shadow under the ice, something big, and it slid out of sight in less than a second. I don't know how to explain it, but it didn't move like a fish or anything alive I've ever seen." That was enough for Thomas. He turned back immediately, telling the others to follow. "We leave now, and we don't tell anyone until we figure out what the hell we saw," he said. But before they even reached their tent, they realized something else was wrong. All 3 of their phones had lost signal. This wasn't unusual in the more remote parts of the state, but here, just 2 miles from the center of Billings, they should have had full service. Kevin's phone still had 65% battery, but no bars, no data, no emergency calls. By 11:15 p.m., the glow on the ice was still there. They decided to pack up and head for the shore. But when John went to start his snowmobile, the headlights flickered once, then died. Kevin's wouldn't start at all. Thomas' machine was barely turning over before the battery gave up completely. In the end, they had to hike back across the lake on foot, their boots crunching through snow crust, the temperature dropping even further. It wasn't until later, much later, that they learned something critical. According to the official statement from the Yellowstone County Sheriff's Office, nothing unusual was reported on Lake Elmo that night. No aircraft distress calls, no meteor activity, no seismic events, and yet, at exactly 10:48 p.m., the National Weather Service station in Billings recorded a brief unexplained spike in local magnetic disturbance. By the time the 3 men reached the eastern shore, it was 11:40 p.m. Behind them, the faint glow under the ice was still pulsing, not fading, not brightening, just holding steady like some kind of heartbeat deep in the frozen water. John still had his old flip phone in his jacket pocket, a relic from before smartphones, and by some miracle, it still had 1 bar of reception. He thumbed in the numbers for 911. "We've obtained the actual audio of that call from a former dispatcher willing to speak off the record. The wind is loud on the line, but John's voice is clear, quick, and tight. DSPATH 911. What's your emergency?" "Join. This is Lake Elmo. Something's gone down on the ice. It's still there. It's glowing under the surface. DSPATH. Sir, are you reporting a downed aircraft?" "Join. No wreckage. No fire. Just light. It's under the ice." There's a pause, a few keystrokes in the background. "DSPATH. Can you give me your location?" "Join. Northwest side. 400 yards out from the point." "DSPATH. All right, stay put. I'm notifying the county sheriff's office and hold on." John later told me he could hear muffled voices on the other end, and then the dispatcher came back with something strange. "DSPATH. Sir, please remain on shore. A unit from the Montana National Guard is en route to your position." "Join. The Guard? Why the hell would?" "DSPATH. Standard protocol. Please do not approach the site again." Here's the first oddity. Normally, a call like this would go to local law enforcement and possibly the fire department for ice rescue, not the National Guard. Yet within minutes, they knew exactly which unit to call. Kevin was restless, pacing on the shoreline, still arguing they should at least get photos before anyone else arrived. But Thomas, the ex-soldier, was staring out over the ice like he was expecting something to come walking toward them. "If they're coming, they already know who we are," he said quietly. "Trust me, you don't want to be on that ice when they show up." Just after 12:20 a.m., they saw headlights cresting the ridge to the southeast. At first, John thought it was a pickup, maybe the sheriff. But then the sound hit, a deep diesel growl, multiple engines. 3 Oshkosh LATVs, the same armored vehicles used by the U.S. military in Afghanistan, rolled down the road toward the lake. Behind them, a camouflaged Humvee with a roof-mounted infrared spotlight. The convoy stopped at the shoreline, and a half-dozen figures in cold-weather tactical gear stepped out. No visible unit patches, no name tags, just American flags on their shoulders and M4 or 1 carbines slung across their chests. One of them, a tall man with a black balaclava pulled up to his goggles, approached. "Sir, this area is now under federal jurisdiction. Please step back to the road," he said. His tone wasn't angry, but it had the kind of weight that comes from someone who doesn't repeat himself. Kevin instinctively pulled out his phone to film, but one of the soldiers immediately peeled off from the group and walked straight toward him. "No photography, no recording," was all he said before holding out his gloved hand. Kevin hesitated, then handed over the phone. Meanwhile, 2 soldiers began unloading heavy tripods and portable floodlights, their beams cutting through the drifting snow and illuminating the ice where the glow still pulsed faintly. Thomas noticed something else. One of the vehicles had an enclosed rear compartment with an antenna array, the kind he'd only seen on mobile command posts. Whoever these people were, they hadn't just grabbed a couple of trucks and driven out here. This was planned, coordinated, ready. Within minutes, more personnel appeared in white thermal overalls, helmets with clear visors. They moved onto the ice in pairs, roped together, carrying long metal cases. The sound of their boots on the frozen surface was swallowed by the wind. But then, there it was again. A low, grinding noise. Not like ice cracking, deeper, metallic, almost like a chain being dragged somewhere below the surface. It lasted only 3 seconds, but it made Thomas stiffen immediately. "That's not ice," he muttered. The 3 men were escorted to their snowmobiles. Except now, something even stranger. All 3 machines were dead. No ignition, no lights, just as useless as they'd been earlier on the lake. The soldiers didn't comment. They simply guided the men toward a waiting county sheriff's pickup, its engine idling under a coat of frost. The sheriff's deputy at the wheel didn't ask questions. He just drove them into Billings, straight to the public safety building. Officially, it was to give statements. Unofficially, it was the start of something much bigger. The morning of January 18th, 2025 in Billings started crisp and quiet. At 7:12 a.m., the temperature was -4 degrees Fahrenheit, the wind had shifted slightly from the north, and the first pale light of dawn was spilling over the rooftops. Most people waking up that Saturday had no idea that Lake Elmo, just a 10-minute drive from downtown, was already surrounded by armed personnel. By the time the sun was up, the Montana National Guard had established a full perimeter. According to one local jogger, who later spoke to me under the condition of anonymity, there were 2 concentric rings of security. In a cordon, soldiers in white winter camo posted every 50 yards around the shoreline. Outer cordon, sheriff's deputies and unmarked SUVs blocking every access road within a 1-mile radius. The jogger said he counted at least 6 armored vehicles on the west side of the lake and several flatbeds carrying what looked like portable generators and submersible gear. What's striking is how fast it happened. This wasn't a reactionary setup. It looked ready-made, as if a rapid deployment plan had been in place for months, maybe years. At 8:03 a.m., the first local news chopper from KTVQ News tried to approach from the south. Less than 2 minutes into their pass, they were ordered over open radio to turn back due to a temporary flight restriction in the area. According to FAA records, that restriction had been filed at 6:41 a.m., well before the public even knew anything had happened. Meanwhile, at a nearby gas station on Main Street, people were already talking. The rumors were a mix of wild and oddly specific. Heard it was a medevac chopper that went down. Somebody said they saw a fireball, meteor maybe. A buddy of mine works for the city water department. He says the lake temp spiked overnight. And then there was a quieter one, the kind of rumor that starts in a low voice but travels fast in small towns. They pulled something out before sunrise. When I asked one of the clerks what something meant, she just shook her head. All I know is my cousin drove by around 5:30 and said there were lights on the ice, and then they weren't there anymore. Back at the lake, the confrontation started around 9:15 a.m. A group of 3 local men, all regular ice fishers, tried to approach the west shore from the walking trail. They were stopped by a soldier holding an M4 who ordered them back. One of them, a man named Russ Carter, got into a brief shouting match. His version of events: I told him I fish here every damn winter, and I wasn't on the ice yet, so it ain't his business. He just stared at me, didn't blink, and said, "Sir, turn around." I said no. That's when another one stepped up. This one had a camera on his helmet and told me I'd be detained if I didn't comply. So I left. Russ swears there were at least 4 small, dome-shaped structures set up on the ice behind the soldiers, like portable shelters, but with cables running out toward the shore. What the official line says: Sheriff's Office press release, 10:27 a.m. There is no hazard to the public. The area is closed temporarily for environmental safety assessments following reports of thin ice. Montana National Guard spokesperson: We are supporting civil authorities in securing the area as part of a public safety exercise. But here's the problem. The ice at Lake Elmo in mid-January is never thin. It's often over a foot thick, and no one could explain why a safety exercise required a flight restriction, armored vehicles, and a no-recording policy. By noon, things took another turn. A local woman named Karen Porter posted a short clip on Facebook, shot from her upstairs window, showing a large dark object being winched out of the ice by a crane mounted on a flatbed. The footage is grainy, zoomed in, but you can make out a reflective, curved surface under the frost. The post was up for less than an hour before it disappeared. Karen later told me she didn't delete it. I just got a message that it violated some policy. Then my account froze for the day. And here's where our 3 fishermen, John, Thomas, and Kevin, come back into the story. While the guard was locking down the lake, the 3 of them were still at the public safety building. Each was interviewed separately. Each was asked the same set of questions, in the same order. How far were you from the glow? Did you take photos or video? Did you see anything moving under the ice? Did you hear anything unusual? Kevin says he was specifically asked if he noticed any change in the light's rhythm, which was strange because he'd never mentioned the pulsing glow to anyone yet. When they were finally released around 12:45 p.m., they were warned not to spread unverified information about what they'd seen. No charges, no written statements to sign, just a handshake and a tight smile from a man in plain clothes who never gave his name. That afternoon, something else surfaced, literally. Around 3:10 p.m., a small boat from the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department was seen being trailered away from the lake under tarp. Normally, these boats are stored for winter. Why launch one in January on a frozen lake unless you cut through the ice to get it in the water? And by sunset, the glowing patch that had drawn the men across the ice the night before was gone. Not dimmed, not frozen over, gone. Inside the Billings Public Safety Building, the walls are painted that bland government beige that makes it impossible to tell if it's day or night outside. The 3 fishermen were put in separate rooms, no chance to compare notes or prep a story. John was interviewed first. He told the story mostly as it happened: the light in the sky, the crash behind the ridge of ice, the faint glow underneath. He said they approached within 100 yards before Thomas insisted they head back. He admitted hearing a low hum, like when a subwoofer's turned on, but nothing's playing. When asked about the glow, he described it as steady, no mention of pulsing. Kevin's interview went differently. He said the light definitely pulsed, like a heartbeat, exactly 2 beats every second. He also claimed he saw movement beneath the ice, something shadowy, large enough to block the glow for a split second. But here's the kicker. He didn't mention hearing any hum at all. Then came Thomas. His account was short, almost clipped. He confirmed seeing the object descend, confirmed the glow, but insisted they never got closer than 200 yards. No hum, no movement. When pressed on why he wanted to turn back so quickly, he said, "Because I've seen what happens when you walk towards something you don't understand." The agents conducting these interviews weren't wearing uniforms. They had government IDs clipped to their belts. Department of Homeland Security. But their questions didn't feel like the standard witness routine. They asked about changes in light rhythm, whether the glow had any color shift, if they felt heat coming from the crack in the ice, whether they experienced ringing in the ears, dizziness, or nausea. It was less about confirming the story and more about measuring symptoms. Kevin told me later that one of them asked him a question that stuck in his head all night. When the glow stopped, did you feel the silence change? He didn't even know how to answer that. After the formal questioning, each man was left alone for almost 40 minutes in a locked room. No phones, no contact. Then a plainclothes officer came in, handed them back their personal belongings, and said the same line to each of them. "You're free to go. We prefer you keep the details to yourself until the investigation is complete." No paperwork, no signatures. Here's where things start to get even stranger. That night, Kevin called John to talk. John's phone rang twice, then went straight to voicemail. When Kevin finally reached him an hour later, John's tone was different, cautious, almost rehearsed. "We should just drop it," he said. "It's not worth the attention." Thomas was even harder to pin down. Kevin knocked on his door around 10 p.m. The blinds were closed. Thomas opened just enough to say, "Don't come back here for a while," before shutting it again. And then there's the surveillance footage. Through a contact at a local business, I got hold of exterior camera footage from a store about half a mile from Lake Elmo. Timestamp, 5:12 a.m., January 18th. In the dim glow of the streetlight, you can see a dark SUV pull up and stop for about 30 seconds. It's too far to see inside, but you can make out 3 people, 2 in heavy coats, 1 in lighter clothing, getting out and walking toward the lake trail. When they return, only 2 come back to the SUV. The vehicle pulls away, heading toward the blocked-off lake road. When I showed this to Kevin, he swore the taller of the 3 figures moved like John. The same gait, the same way he keeps one arm stiff when walking. But John never mentioned being anywhere near the lake after the interview. Was it him? If so, why go back? And who didn't come back with him? By the following morning, word around Billings was that something had been pulled from under the ice and loaded onto a flatbed under heavy tarp. The official story from the guard was that it was a piece of debris from a small aircraft. No registration number, no photos, no explanation for why it was glowing. And while the locals were still speculating over coffee and pie at Stella's Diner, something else happened. The first crack in the official narrative. A leaked internal memo from the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks surfaced on an encrypted forum that same day. In it, a field officer reported residual electromagnetic disturbance at coordinates matching the glow's location, enough to disrupt GPS devices and short-range radios. The memo was marked Declassification, Federal. Do not distribute outside authorized channels. By the time I read it, it had already been deleted from the forum. By January 20th, Lake Elmo was still under full lockdown. The official explanation hadn't changed. Public safety exercise combined with environmental hazard mitigation. But something was different. Locals who drove past the outer perimeter said the soldiers looked tired, not just tired from standing in the cold, but worn down. By then they'd been out there for 3 straight nights, rotating shifts in the sub-zero wind. Some had faces half covered with frost masks. Others had their goggles up, squinting against the glare of the floodlights still aimed toward the ice. And that's when the first real leak came. It didn't come from a soldier or a federal agent. It came from a contract diver, a man who, according to my source, was hired through a private marine salvage company out of Idaho Falls. He sent an encrypted voice message to someone in Billings he trusted. That recording eventually reached me. The voice is calm, but there's an edge to it, like he's still processing what he saw. We went in under the ice at about 300, tethered standard safety. The water was murky, silt from the impact, I guess. We were looking for structural debris, maybe a rotor assembly if it was a chopper. But there was no metal shrapnel, no wiring, nothing that looked mechanical. What we found was smooth, like glass, but not cold. I put my glove on it, and it almost felt like it was adjusting to my hand. There was a curve, a perfect curve, like part of a sphere, and it was still glowing real faint from inside. The diver claimed they were only allowed 2 minutes near the object before they were pulled back by a signal from the surface. He didn't see it removed, just that when he surfaced 20 minutes later, the crane was already lifting something large and dripping onto the flatbed. No photos, no measurements, and the next day his company got a call. Their services were no longer required. When I cross-checked his name with the salvage company's roster, it had been scrubbed, as if he'd never worked there. Meanwhile, Kevin was starting to feel like someone was watching him. On the night of the 20th, he noticed a black Chevy Suburban parked down the street from his apartment. It was still there an hour later when he looked out again. The next morning, he saw the same SUV in his rear-view mirror all the way from his place to a gas station on Grand Avenue. He called John about it, but John shut him down fast. "Stop calling me. This isn't your problem anymore. Here's where things get murky." A different source, a former Montana state trooper, told me he overheard a conversation at the public safety building 2 days after the incident. The subject, Kevin Lee. The trooper claimed someone from a federal office was asking whether Kevin had any history of medical conditions, particularly neurological ones. Why would that matter in a supposed aircraft crash investigation? It gets even stranger when you factor in what Thomas was doing at the same time. A neighbor of his said she saw him in his backyard that night, burning something in a metal barrel. It looked like clothes, maybe gear, she told me. He kept poking it with a stick, making sure it all went up. When I asked Thomas about it later, he said it was just old junk from the shed. But the neighbor insisted she saw a bright red parka in the flames, the same kind he'd been wearing on the ice the night of the 17th. By January 21st, the rumors in town had shifted again. It wasn't just something fell into the lake. Now it was. They found a pod. There was something inside. It wasn't empty. I can't prove those last claims. But I can prove this. On the morning of the 21st, the Montana National Guard filed an equipment requisition for Class VI protective transport cases rated for sensitive electronic and hazardous material. Those cases were delivered to the Lake Elmo site within hours. By nightfall, the floodlights were off. The perimeter was still up, but the activity on the ice had stopped. It looked like they'd found whatever they came for. On the evening of January 23, 2025, Kevin Lee didn't show up for work. That in itself wasn't unusual. He was a contract-it tech, and he sometimes skipped shifts when he had freelance gigs. But what was unusual was that he also didn't answer calls or texts from his mother, who lived in Laurel, just 15 minutes away. By the next morning, his car, a silver 2016 Subaru Forester, was still parked in the lot outside his apartment. The driver's door was locked, but the passenger side was slightly ajar, frost creeping across the window from the overnight low. Inside, his phone sat on the front seat, screen black, battery dead. His wallet was in the center console. The Billings Police Department opened a missing person report that afternoon, but by then, word had already spread. Kevin, the youngest of the 3 fishermen who saw the thing at Lake Elmo, was gone. When I spoke to his mother later, she told me about a phone call Kevin made to her just 2 nights earlier. He said, "Mom, I think someone came into my apartment when I was out." She asked him if anything was missing. "No," he said, "but my laptop was on when I got home, and I didn't leave it that way." He told her he thought someone had copied his files. That same night, several residents of Kevin's building reported seeing a man in a dark hooded jacket sitting in a parked vehicle across the street for hours. Nobody recognized him as a tenant. And then there was the security camera footage. A nearby coffee shop had an exterior cam facing the alley behind Kevin's building. At 2:14 a.m. on the 23rd, it caught a figure walking toward the back entrance. Medium build, winter coat, no hat, no gloves, moving quickly. The camera's infrared caught a brief flash of something reflective at their side, waist height. At 2:17 a.m., the same figure left the building. Kevin was never seen again. Meanwhile, strange things were happening back at Lake Elmo. Even though the National Guard had begun pulling back their vehicles and some of the fencing, residents on the east side reported faint lights over the lake after dark, pale blue hovering low, sometimes flickering before vanishing. On the night of the 24th, a man named Raymond Ortiz, a delivery driver who cut through the area after late runs, claimed he saw 3 pinpoint lights moving in perfect unison above the frozen water. "It wasn't a drone," he said. "Drones buzz. This was silent, and they just blinked out." Another witness, a local teacher, told me her dog refused to go near the lake trail that week. "She's never acted like that before. She just froze, hair up, whining." We turned around. It's worth noting, in the same time frame, the FAA's public flight records show multiple instances of temporary flight restrictions being issued over the Lake Elmo area at night. These restrictions typically last 30 to 60 minutes and are often used for law enforcement or hazardous material operations, but there's no record of who requested them. And then came the part that really shook the town, the official statement about Kevin's disappearance. On January 26th, the Billings PD held a press conference. The spokesperson read from a prepared sheet. "There is no indication of foul play at this time. Mr. Lee left his apartment voluntarily. We are following all leads." Voluntarily, his car, wallet, and phone were all left behind. His mother says he had plans that day. There was no sign he packed a bag, no transactions on his bank account. When I asked one of my law enforcement contacts about it, he gave me a look I'll never forget, a mix of frustration and fear, and said, off the record, "This isn't ours anymore. This one's federal now." At the same time, John Mason had gone completely quiet. No answering the door, no calls returned. A neighbor swore she saw him loading boxes into the back of a rental truck late at night and driving off before dawn. His house sat dark after that. Thomas Hale. Well, he was still in town. But when I knocked on his door on the 27th, he opened it just enough to look me in the eye and say, "Stop digging. You don't know what's at the bottom of that lake." Then he shut it without another word. The more I pushed, the more it felt like this wasn't just a military clean-up. This was containment, not of whatever fell into Lake Elmo, but of the people who got too close. And Kevin. It was starting to feel like he might be the first to vanish, but not the last. By the final week of January, the quiet around Lake Elmo was starting to fracture. The big networks weren't touching it. No CNN vans, no Fox News chirons, but smaller, hungrier outlets were sniffing around. First came the regional blogs. The Billings Gazette, Montana Watchdog, Then the YouTube channels, the kind with names like Eyes on the Sky and Truth North of 49. One of those independent investigators, a man named Peter Langford, had driven up from Colorado Springs. Langford was ex-Air Force, now running a mid-tier UFO research channel with about 180,000 subscribers. He wasn't a crank. He used to handle avionics systems on F-16s. 2 days after arriving, he called me with something big. "You're not gonna believe what I've got my hands on," he said. Thermal imaging from the night of the 17th. Not from a civilian, not from a hobby drone, from a state agency aircraft. The image he sent was grainy, low-res, but clear enough. A bright, circular heat signature about 30 yards wide, sitting dead center in Lake Elmo, surrounded by cold ice. The timestamp, 10:49 p.m., less than 2 minutes after John Thomas and Kevin saw the object vanish. But the real kicker, the heat signature wasn't static. In the next frame, just 4 seconds later, it had shifted position under the ice. Around the same time, a member of the Billings Scanner Watch Facebook group posted something that got deleted within hours. What they claimed was intercepted VHF chatter from the National Guard frequency that night. The clip was short, only 14 seconds, but you could make out. Voice 1. Command be advised. Subject is not secure. Repeating, subject is not secure. Voice 2. Copy. Maintain perimeter until further instruction. Containment is priority. Subject, not wreckage, not object. On January 29th, a new leak hit, a map. A researcher from Helena, who's been tracking military exercises for years, published what he said was a restricted operations overlay for the Lake Elmo site. It showed 4 designated landing zones for helicopters, 2 dive entry points on the north shore, a marked Zone 3, the center of the lake, labeled only with the letters APEX. When asked what APEX meant, he said it's a term occasionally used in federal recovery operations to mark primary asset location. That same night, I got an encrypted email from an address I didn't recognize. No greeting, no signature, just a single sentence. Ask why the divers weren't allowed more than 120 seconds of contact time. The media coverage, limited as it was, started to change tone. It wasn't about UFOs anymore. It was about disappearances. Kevin's case became the headline. Where's the Lake Elmo witness? Flyers went up around town. A vigil was planned at the West Shore, but was shut down by police for safety reasons. And then the second scare hit. A retired wildlife biologist named Harold Decker told me he'd been walking near the lake trail just after midnight on February 1st when he saw someone, tall, heavy build, standing on the ice without any light source. It was cold enough to kill you out there in 15 minutes, he said. And this guy, he wasn't moving, just standing there. I called out, but he didn't answer. Then I looked down at my phone to hit record, and when I looked back, gone. Harold didn't believe in UFOs. He thought maybe it was a soldier on some kind of night patrol. But when he described the figure's clothing, no parka, no hat, just a dark form in the cold, it didn't sound like anyone prepared for sub-zero exposure. By now, Thomas Hale's paranoia had gone into overdrive. When I tried visiting him again, his curtains were duct-taped to the wall. He spoke to me through the door. "You want my advice? Stop thinking of this as a crash. It didn't crash. It came down on purpose, and they didn't get all of it." He wouldn't elaborate. But his words lined up with something Langford had found, a shortwave recording from January 20th, allegedly between 2 unidentified operators. Voice 1. Recoverable mass is incomplete, proceeding to Phase 2. Voice 2. Understood. Perimeter remains active. And then, late one night, my phone burst. A text from an unknown number. Kevin isn't missing. He's been moved. No explanation. No follow-up. Just that. By early February, the National Guard had scaled back to a skeleton crew. 2 Humvees at the main access point. A handful of soldiers walking the shoreline. To most people, it looked like the operation was winding down. But if the asset was truly gone, the lake wasn't behaving like it. On the night of February 4th, a group of high school seniors decided to sneak out to the North Shore and see the site for themselves. One of them, Megan Pierce, later spoke to me in her parents' garage, her voice low even though no one else was around. We didn't even make it to the shore. We were maybe 50 yards from the water when we saw it. This shimmer, like heat waves, except it was 20 degrees out. It was coming off the ice. We all stopped. And then we heard it. This deep sound, not loud, but you could feel it in your stomach. My friend Sam dropped his phone. The screen went black and wouldn't turn back on. We just ran. They made it back to their car, but 2 of the phones in their group wouldn't boot, and one of their watches kept vibrating like it was getting notifications, even after the battery died. That same week, a fisherman named Bill Rowe, who'd been ignoring the closures, was cited for trespassing after being found on the southeast shore. When I tracked him down, he was more than happy to talk, but what he described didn't sound like trespassing. I wasn't even on the lake, he said. I was just walking the edge, and I saw something moving under the ice, fast. Not a fish, not a beaver. It was too big. Oval-shaped, like a dark bubble, but it stayed just beneath the surface, following me as I walked. And then, he stopped here, staring at his hands for a moment. It stopped, right in front of me, and I swear I saw light inside it, just for a second, like an eye-opening. Even more unsettling were the animals. On February 7th, residents on the east side woke up to find dead waterfowl, mostly mallards and coots, scattered along the ice edge. No signs of predation, no gunshot wounds. The Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks collected the bodies but never released test results. A local vet I spoke to, who examined 2 of the birds privately, said the internal organs showed acute cellular breakdown. Something she said looked more like radiation damage than disease. Then there was the weather. Twice in February, NOAA's Billings weather station recorded sudden, localized temperature drops of 15 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit within a 3-minute span. Both events occurred between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock a.m., and both were centered over the Lake Elmo area. No storms, no cold fronts, just a sharp, unnatural drop that dissipated as quickly as it came. I showed the data to a retired atmospheric scientist. His take was blunt. If your instruments are right, something's drawing heat out of the air. That's not natural. That's extraction. Meanwhile, locals were beginning to report seeing a lone figure at night, sometimes on the ice, sometimes along the walking path. Always alone, always motionless. No one ever got close enough to see the face. One man, Darren Cole, swore he tried. I thought it was a game warden or something. I called out. Nothing. So I walked toward him, got maybe 30 feet away, and my ears popped, like when a plane's descending. Then it felt like I stepped into a freezer. My breath just froze in front of me, and I couldn't take another step. My legs locked, and when I blinked, he was gone. By now, the official story was collapsing for anyone paying attention. The guard insisted the lake was safe. The sheriff's office insisted there was no missing Kevin Lee, and the city's PR office released a canned statement about wildlife mortality events being within seasonal expectations. But the sightings were stacking up. The weather data was real, and whatever was under that ice, if it had ever left, wasn't done yet. The first time I heard the words Operation Coldwell was from a contact in Helena, a former state emergency coordinator who'd seen his share of wildfire briefings, flood maps, and hazmat cleanups. This one, he told me, was different. No FEMA, no EPA. It was all Guard and Federal, and everyone local was told to keep their heads down. Even the governor's office only got bullet points. 2 weeks later, an unmarked Manila envelope showed up in my P.O. box. No return address. Inside, 9 pages printed from what looked like a government PDF. The header read, United States Army, Northern Command. Operation Coldwell. Classification. Secret/NOFORN. The first page was a situation summary. It matched parts of the public narrative. Impact event over frozen freshwater body. Possible foreign origin material. But then diverged into territory the public was never told. Impact coordinates matched exactly where John, Thomas, and Kevin had seen the glow. Thermal anomaly persisted for 9 hours and 43 minutes after the impact. Under ice object measured at approximately 8.6 meters in diameter, non-ferrous, partially translucent under thermal imaging. Auditory phenomena recorded. Low frequency resonance between 17 to 19 AVs. Intermittent physiological effects reported by personnel. The next pages were field notes from divers. Some of the language was blacked out, but what remained was enough. Surface smooth to the touch. No visible seams or fasteners. Object emits faint internal light without external power source. Subject responds to proximity. Increased vibration detected when approached within 1.5 meters. Dive time restricted to 120 seconds due to REDACTD. That redaction repeated 3 times in different contexts. Whatever the reason for that strict time limit, it was something they didn't want on paper. Then came the real gut punch, a section labeled Containment Recommendations. Given the unknown origin and adaptive response characteristics, continued civilian exposure is not advised. Witnesses to initial event should be monitored for REDACTD. One primary witness has already demonstrated potential link to REDACTD. Relocation recommended. One witness. Relocation. There were only 3 witnesses, and one of them was already gone. The last page was a timeline. It showed the object was extracted from the lake at 5:42 on January 18th. But then, at 6:19, another thermal spike was recorded in the exact same coordinates. It lasted for 7 minutes. Officially, there was nothing left in the lake, but the data said otherwise. I cross-referenced the codename Coldwell with other military operations and found only one partial match, a joint Army/Navy exercise in 1998 simulating recovery of submerged assets in Arctic conditions. That op involved cryogenic shielding, portable containment domes, and long-term biological monitoring of personnel. If the parallels were accurate, this wasn't just a recovery mission. It was something they expected could still affect people long after removal. When I showed the report to Peter Langford, the ex-Air Force investigator, his first reaction was just a long, quiet whistle. You know what the scariest part is? That thermal spike after extraction. That means they either left a piece behind, or it left something of itself behind. He leaned back in his chair, looking at me like he just said too much. And if Kevin's gone because of that last part, he's not coming back. February 12, 2025. The snow had fallen heavy the night before, smoothing every rough edge of the shoreline around Lake Elmo. The military was gone. The roadblocks were gone. But the silence was still there. I went out just after sunrise, following the old walking trail along the east bank. The lake was a sheet of white, no cracks, no holes, nothing to mark what had happened here. And then, I saw it, half buried in snow at the water's edge, a glove, not the kind you buy at Walmart or Cabela's. This was a heavy-duty insulated diver's glove, black neoprene with reinforced fingertips. The left glove. On the inside cuff, written in faded Sharpie, were 2 letters, KL, Kevin Lee. It was frozen stiff, the inside damp. And there, stuck to the inner lining, were tiny shards of something clear, not ice. Under the morning light, they caught the sun like glass, but they weren't cold to the touch. I took a photo, then another, and just as I reached down to pick it up, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. No caller ID. I answered. At first, nothing. Just faint static. Then, a voice. Quiet. Far away. Don't come back. It was only 3 words, but I swear, it was Kevin's voice. The line went dead. Later that day, I sent the glove and the shards to a contact at Montana State University. He ran basic spectrograph tests. His email back was short. Not glass, not quartz, not any silica-based material I can match. Structure appears organic, from something 8.5 meters across, smooth as glass, glowing under the ice. That night, just before midnight, I drove back to the lake one last time, parked by the trail, killed the engine. The sky was cloudless, the moon hanging low and white over the frozen water. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, far out near the center, a faint blue light appeared under the ice. It didn't glow steady this time. It pulsed. Once, twice, pause. Once, twice, pause. The exact rhythm Kevin had described in his interview, the one he swore he saw before it went dark. And just for a second, no more than a heartbeat, I thought I saw a shadow moving through the light. Then it was gone. The official word is still environmental safety exercise. Kevin Lee is still listed as a voluntary missing adult, and whatever was in those 9 pages of Operation Coldwell is still classified. But if you ever find yourself on the north shore of Lake Elmo on a still winter night, put your phone away. Listen. If you feel the ice under your boots, leave. Because whatever they pulled out of that lake, something of it stayed behind.